Marcus Cole stared at the radar screen, his weathered hands hovering over the controls as an inexplicable pattern emerged before his eyes. 23 years of air traffic control experience told him something was wrong, but nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was about to discover. As the passenger jet traced unusual symbols in the sky, Marcus would uncover a veteran's desperate message that would shake him to his core. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Marcus adjusted his headset in the dimly lit control room of Hartford International Airport. The late October storm brewing outside matched his mood, unsettled and charged with anticipation. At 52, he'd seen almost everything the skies could throw at a controller, but lately the job felt different. Maybe it was the weight of all those years watching blips on radar screens, or maybe it was the approaching anniversary that always made this time of year harder to bear. The 4 a.m. shift was typically quiet, perfect for someone like Marcus, who preferred the peaceful pre-dawn hours. The soft glow of radar screens and instrument panels provided just enough light to work by, casting the rest of the room in comfortable shadows. A half-empty cup of coffee sat cooling beside him, forgotten, as he focused on guiding the handful of cargo flights and red-eyes through his airspace. "Looking a bit rough there, old-timer," Sarah Chen called from her station across the room. At 35, she was one of the more experienced controllers on the night shift, though still nearly 2 decades his junior. "Those midnight shifts, starting to wear you down?" Marcus managed a tired smile, without taking his eyes off his screen. "Just thinking about taking some time off next week. Getting too old for these graveyard shifts." Sarah knew better than to push the subject. Everyone in the tower knew about Marcus's annual leave around this time. It was as predictable as winter snow in New England. No one asked why anymore, though rumors had circulated over the years. Something about his time in the Air Force, a mission gone wrong, a date that carried too much weight. "Delta 1857, maintain flight level 330, expect lower in 20 miles, Marcus spoke into his headset, his voice carrying the calm authority that came with experience. The pilot acknowledged, and another blip moved smoothly across his screen. The night shift had settled into its usual rhythm when the first irregularity appeared. United 2431, a Boeing 737 on its way to Chicago, began a slight deviation from its assigned course. Nothing dramatic, just a few degrees off heading, but enough to catch Marcus's attention. "United 2431, Hartford Control, I'm showing you. Slightly off course. Please confirm heading 270. Static crackled in his headset before the pilot's voice came through, clear but with an odd tension. "Hartford Control, United 2431. We're experiencing some unusual instrument readings, requesting permission to maintain current heading for weather avoidance." Marcus frowned, studying his weather radar. The approaching storm was still well to the east, nowhere near United 2431's flight path. "United 2431, weather appears clear along your route. Please clarify nature of instrument anomaly." The pause before the pilot's response lasted a beat too long. "Hartford Control, we're..." "Stand by." Sarah had wheeled her chair closer, picking up on the subtle shift in atmosphere. "Everything okay? Over there?" "Not sure," Marcus replied, keeping his eyes on United 2431's blip. The aircraft had begun another turn, this one more pronounced. Something's off about this one. The plane's new course wasn't dangerous. Marcus had already checked for conflicts with other traffic, but it was definitely unusual. The turn seemed deliberate, almost geometric in its precision. As he watched, the aircraft began what looked like a carefully planned sequence of heading changes. "United 2431, Hartford Control, I need you to confirm your intentions." Marcus's voice remained professional, but his pulse had quickened. 2 decades of military service before his controller. Career had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every one of them was signaling alert. The response, when it came, was garbled. "Hartford, must complete." The transmission cut off abruptly. Sarah was fully engaged now, her own sector temporarily forgotten. "Want me to call the supervisor?" Marcus shook his head, watching, as United 2431 executed another precise turn. "Not yet. Something about this feels—" He trailed off as the pattern suddenly clicked into place. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he recognized what he was seeing. Dear God, the aircraft wasn't just deviating from its course, it was drawing. Each turn, each heading change was deliberate, forming what appeared to be letters against the black canvas of his radar screen, and not just any letters. "Sarah," Marcus's voice had gone hoarse, "get me everything you can on United 2431's flight crew, now!" As Sarah hurried to pull up the flight details, Marcus keyed his mic. Again, this time switching to the emergency frequency. "United 2431, this is Hartford Control on guard. If you're attempting to signal for help, acknowledge with a 7700 squawk." The plane maintained its course, continuing its careful skywriting. No emergency squawk came, but Marcus didn't need one. He knew what he was seeing, a pattern he hadn't encountered since his days flying combat missions over Baghdad. A distress signal, but not one taught in any civilian flight school. It was a code used by special operations pilots during the Gulf War, when radio silence was necessary, but help was desperately needed. A code he himself had used once, on what would become the last mission of his military career. Sarah returned with the flight manifest, her face pale. "Marcus, the captain, it's Wilson, James Wilson." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the name registered. How many times had he replayed that mission in his dreams? How many times had he seen that same name on the casualty list he'd been forced to compile afterward? James Wilson hadn't been listed among the dead, he'd made it home. But clearly the war hadn't left him behind. The storm outside grew closer, lightning illuminating the control room in brief, harsh flashes. On Marcus's screen, United 2431 continued its silent cry for help, drawing letters that only a handful of veterans would recognize, carrying a message that would force Marcus to confront the past he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away as Marcus stared at the radar screen, memories flooding back with each new turn of United 2431. "Marcus, should I call the supervisor?" The question snapped him back to the present. United 2431 carried over 200 passengers. This wasn't the time for ghosts from the past. "Yes," he managed, his throat tight. "Get Thompson up here. And Sarah, tell him it's a Crimson Shadow situation." Her eyebrows shot up at the unfamiliar code, but she reached for the phone without questioning. Marcus turned his attention back to the aircraft, which had completed another series of precise maneuvers. The pattern was unmistakable now. Wilson was using an old special operations technique of converting longitudinal and latitudinal changes into letters, something they'd developed for situations when radio communication was compromised. "United 2431, this is Hartford Control." Marcus tried again, switching back to the main frequency. "Captain Wilson, James, if you can hear me, I know what you're trying to tell us, but there are civilians on board. Whatever's happening up there, we need to think about their safety." Static answered him, but the aircraft's movement changed. Slightly, a subtle acknowledgement. Before Marcus could try again, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of Night Supervisor David Thompson, his usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from being summoned from his office. "Talk to me, Cole. What's this about a Crimson Shadow?" Thompson's deep voice carried the authority of someone used to handling crises, even if this particular code meant nothing to him. Marcus gestured to his screen, where United 2431 continued. "It's complex dance. I've got a Boeing 737 executing unauthorized course changes. No emergency declared. Minimal radio contact, but they're flying in a specific pattern. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The captain is James Wilson. We served together in Special Operations Gulf War. He's using an old distress code. And one we developed for compromised situations. Thompson's expression darkened. Compromised how? Are you suggesting this is a security situation? I don't know, Marcus admitted, watching another series of turns unfold. Wilson was one of our best pilots. The pattern he's flying, it takes incredible skill. Whatever's happening up there, he's in control of the aircraft, but something's preventing normal communication. The supervisor studied the radar display, frowning. Those turns look awful tight for a commercial jet. Any signs of passenger distress? Marcus shook his head. Flight attendants haven't triggered any silent alarms. No emergency squawk. Ground. Speed and altitude are stable. It's almost like what? Like he's trying to tell us something specific, something he can't say over the radio. Marcus leaned closer to his screen, analyzing the pattern. These aren't random deviations. Each sequence corresponds to... His voice trailed off as the next series of turns registered. Sarah, who had been quietly coordinating with adjacent sectors to clear airspace around United 2431, wheeled closer. What is it? Coordinates, Marcus said softly. He's giving us coordinates, but they're not current position. They're historical. August 15th, 1991, Operation Desert Shield. He looked up at Thompson, whose expression showed growing concern. The day everything went wrong. Thompson pulled up a chair, his voice low. I need to know what we're dealing with here, Cole. If this is some kind of PTSD episode... No, Marcus. Cut him off more sharply than he'd intended. Wilson's too good for that. This is deliberate. He's trying to tell us something about that mission, something he couldn't say before. Another sequence of turns caught his eye. There's more. He's mixing in a current location. Something about... Sarah, can you pull up a map of ground features along their current route? Sarah's fingers flew over her keyboard. Got it. They're approaching the Berkshires. There's a military storage facility about 30 miles ahead of their current position. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as the pieces started falling into place. Thompson, I need to know, has there been any chatter about security concerns at that facility? Anything in the past few weeks? The supervisor's hesitation was answer enough. That's classified information, Cole. You know I can't... David, Marcus interrupted, using the supervisor's first name for the first time in years. 20 veterans died because of what happened on that mission in '91. Wilson and I were the only survivors. And now he's up there, risking his career to tell us something about it. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than classified. Thunder boomed closer now, and lightning illuminated the control room in stark bursts. United 2431 had begun another series of turns, each one precise, each one adding to the message that only Marcus could fully understand. Thompson was silent for a long moment, then sighed. There was a breach attempt last week. Nothing got out in the media. Some former military personnel were involved. The FBI thinks they had inside help. Marcus nodded grimly, watching as Wilson drew another set of coordinates in the sky. He's not having an episode, David. He's warning us. Whatever happened in '91, whatever really happened, it's not over. And somehow, that facility is connected. Sarah looked between them, her professional calm slightly shaken. So what do we do? We've got over 200 passengers up there, and a pilot who's basically skywriting classified military intelligence. First, Thompson said, reaching for the phone, we contact the FBI's aviation division. Then... Wait, Marcus interrupted, his eyes fixed on a new pattern emerging on his screen. Wilson's changing course again. This isn't just about the past anymore. He grabbed his mic. United 2431, Hartford Control. James, if this is about current threats, acknowledge with a heading change to 275. The aircraft banked smoothly. to the requested heading, and Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "Thompson, we need to lock down that facility. Now. Whatever Wilson's trying to prevent, it's not in the past. It's happening tonight." The storm outside grew stronger, but inside the control room, an even darker storm was brewing. One that had been building for over 30 years, and was about to break with devastating force. Thompson's phone call to the FBI was interrupted by a sudden burst of radio activity. United 2431's transponder code changed, flashing new numbers across Marcus's screen in rapid succession. Not random numbers, a sequence that made his blood run cold. 81591, Marcus muttered, his fingers gripping the edge of his console. The mission designation. He's confirming what I thought. Sarah glanced between Marcus and the radar display. Care to fill us in on what that mission was, if we're dealing with a current threat? Marcus took a deep breath, the memories he'd kept locked away for decades flooding back. Operation Sandstorm, a covert extraction mission during Desert Storm. 22 of us went in to retrieve what we thought was intel about chemical weapons. Wilson was my wingman. He paused, watching another series of turns unfold on his screen. Only 2 of us made it back. What went wrong? Thompson asked, his phone call momentarily forgotten. That's just it. We never knew. The intel was bad. The target location was wrong, and we flew right into... Marcus's voice caught. We lost good people that night. When we got back, everything about the mission was classified. Wilson and I were separated, debriefed individually. The official report said it was pilot error, poor weather conditions, but Wilson and I knew better. United 2431 had begun another series of precise maneuvers, its flight path drawing new patterns across the radar screen. Thompson leaned closer, studying the display. These new turns, they're different from the others. Marcus nodded grimly. He's giving us names. The crew manifest from that night: Phillips, Rodriguez, Martinez. Each name corresponded to a specific sequence of turns, a memorial written in contrails 5 miles above the earth. But why now? Why risk everything to tell us this after all these years? Sarah's computer chimed with an incoming alert. Marcus, I've got something. That storage facility. It was originally a chemical weapons repository during Desert Storm. It was supposedly decommissioned in '95, but satellite imagery shows it's still actively maintained by a private military contractor. Which contractor? Marcus asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew the answer. Black Ridge Security Solutions, Sarah replied, scanning the data. Founded in 1992 by former military personnel, including, she paused, her eyes widening, including several officers who were involved in investigating the sandstorm incident. Thunder crashed outside as the pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind. The breach attempt last week. Thompson, did Black Ridge handle the investigation? Internally, they insisted on it, Thompson confirmed. Said it was a minor incident, probably just kids testing the perimeter. FBI backed off when Black Ridge showed them their security credentials. United 2431 banked again, its new course taking it directly over the facility in question. Marcus keyed his mic. United 2431, Hartford Control. James, if Black Ridge is involved. In current operations, acknowledge with a descent request. The response was immediate. Hartford Control, United 2431, requesting descent to flight level 240 due to turbulence. There is no turbulence, Sarah said quietly, checking her weather radar. No, Marcus agreed, but there's something happening at that facility. Tonight. Something Wilson thinks is connected to what really happened in '91. He turned to Thompson. We need to contact local law enforcement. Get eyes on that facility right now. Thompson was already dialing. On it. But Marcus, if Wilson's right, if Black Ridge is somehow involved in both incidents, Then they've had 30 years to perfect whatever they were working on in Desert Storm, Marcus finished, and they've been hiding it right here in New England. Sarah's voice cut through their discussion. Multiple aircraft appearing on radar, small signatures, no transponders. They just took off from a private airstrip near the facility. Marcus's military training kicked in as he assessed the new threats. How many? 5 contacts. Flying in formation heading northeast. Wait, United 2431 is changing. In course to parallel their track. Wilson's following them, Marcus realized. He must have spotted them from his altitude. He grabbed his mic again. United 2431, Hartford Control. Be advised you have multiple unknown aircraft in your vicinity. Recommend immediate course correction to avoid traffic. When Wilson's voice came back, it was clearer than before, laden with purpose. Hartford Control, negative on course correction. We need to maintain visual contact with these aircraft. Marcus, remember what we found in the bunker? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. The bunker, the last place they'd seen their teammates alive. The place where they'd discovered... "Dear God," he whispered. The weapons weren't complete. Back then, they didn't work properly. That's why everything went wrong. "What weapons?" Thompson demanded. "Marcus, what are we dealing with here?" But Marcus was already reaching for the secure line, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed. "This is Hartford Center declaring a SITREP crown. Authentication code. Echo 815901. We have unauthorized transport of classified materials, multiple aircraft, possible CBR threat. Request immediate military response." The storm outside had reached its peak, lightning illuminating the control room in stark flashes as Marcus watched his old friend track the mysterious aircraft through the turbulent night sky. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, answers to a 30-year-old mystery were finally taking flight, and with them, a threat that had been decades in the making. Wilson's voice crackled through once more. "Marcus, whatever happens next, the truth has to come out. For Phillips, for Rodriguez, for all of them." "Copy. That, old friend," Marcus replied softly. This time we finished the mission right. The secure line crackled with immediate response. "Hartford Center, this is Northeast Command. Authentication confirmed. Multiple F-15s scrambling from Barnes. ETA 12 minutes. Report situation." Marcus's mind raced as he formulated a response that would convey the urgency without revealing classified information over an open channel. "Northeast Command, we have 5 bogies, possibly carrying unauthorized materials from Site Echo 7. United 2431, maintaining visual contact. Request immediate lockdown of all facilities within 100-mile radius." Sarah's voice cut through. The radio chatter. "Marcus, the unidentified aircraft are changing formation. They're splitting up." On the radar screen, the 5 blips began diverging, each taking a different heading. United 2431, still at higher altitude, maintained position. Above the dispersing formation. Wilson's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Hartford, they're separating. Each aircraft appears to be carrying sealed containers. Standard military transport configuration." Thompson, who had been coordinating with local law enforcement, covered his phone's mouthpiece. "State police are en route to the facility, but it's at least 20 minutes out. FBI's mobilizing a tactical team." "They'll be too late," Marcus muttered, watching the scattered aircraft plots. "This isn't a simple theft. It's a distribution operation. They're trying to make sure at least some of the material gets through." He keyed his mic again. "United 2431, can you maintain visual on all targets?" "Negative, Hartford. They're dropping to deck level. I've got primary target only, bearing 060. Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. A familiar sensation from his military days, one he'd hoped never to feel again. "Northeast Command, be advised, targets are executing dispersal pattern. Request vector for intercept." The response was immediate, but not encouraging. "Hartford, negative on intercept vectors at this time. F-15s are 4 minutes out, but weather is severely limiting visibility. Cannot execute tactical intercept without positive target ID. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the control room in harsh bursts. The storm that had been brewing all night was now directly overhead, its intensity matching the growing crisis. Sarah's fingers flew over her keyboard as she coordinated with adjacent sectors, clearing airspace and redirecting civilian traffic away from the developing situation. "Marcus," she called out, "I've got something else. That private airstrip, it's registered to a subsidiary of Blackridge, and there's a pattern of late-night flights over the past month, all during weather events. They've been practicing," Marcus realized, "using the storms as cover for God knows what they're really transporting." He turned to Thompson. "David, we need to make a decision. If those aircraft reach populated areas with whatever they're carrying—" Thompson nodded. "Grimly, do it. Whatever you need. You've got full authorization." Marcus took a deep breath, then keyed his emergency frequency. "United 2431, this is Hartford Control. James, what we found in that bunker, what they were working on, was it mobile?" Wilson's response was barely audible through the static. "Affirmative. Designed for aerial dispersal. They've perfected it, Marcus. The signatures I'm seeing on these containers, they match what we saw that night." The implications hit everyone in the control room at once. Sarah's face went pale, and Thompson grabbed for his phone again, this time dialing a number Marcus recognized as the governor's emergency line. "United 2431, Marcus's voice was steady now, years of training taking over. "I'm declaring this a broken arrow scenario. You are authorized to maintain pursuit of primary target. Military support incoming." "Copy that, Hartford." Wilson's voice had changed too, taking on the crisp professionalism of his special operations days. "Be advised, we've got passengers on board. I won't put them at risk." "Understood." Marcus studied his radar, mind racing through options. The storm cell was moving northeast, creating a natural corridor. If they could funnel the target aircraft into that space. "United 2431. Suggest heading 075. Weather cell will force target to either climb or divert east. F-15s can intercept if they attempt to climb," Sarah interrupted, her voice urgent. "Marcus, I'm picking up encrypted transmissions between the scattered aircraft. They're coordinating something." Before Marcus could respond, United 2431's transponder began broadcasting an unusual code sequence. Wilson's voice cut through the static. "Hartford, they're not just transporting it, they're going to demonstrate it. Multiple targets, preset coordinates. This isn't a theft, it's a statement." Marcus felt his blood run cold. A demonstration. Why would they? Then it hit him. The investigation 30 years ago, it wasn't just covered up, it was planned. They needed that mission to fail, needed witnesses eliminated, except 2. "Survived," Thompson said quietly. "You and Wilson." "And now they're finishing what they started," Marcus concluded. He grabbed his mic again. "United 2431. Maintain safe distance. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to engage. Mark target location only." Wilson's reply was grim. "Too late for that, old friend. I've got eyes on the primary target's payload bay. They're starting pre-release procedures. If that device activates—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The storm raged outside as Marcus watched his radar screen, where a decades-old mission was reaching its true conclusion. Somewhere in the darkness above, his friend was about to make a decision that would either prevent a catastrophe or trigger one. And this time, Marcus could only watch and guide, unable to fly beside him as he had that fateful night in the desert. "James," he said softly into his mic, "whatever you're thinking of doing, remember there are civilians on board. I remember everything, Marcus, every face from that night, every name, every promise we made to get the truth out." Wilson's voice was calm now, almost peaceful. Sometimes, the only way to prevent history from repeating is to confront it head-on. Thunder crashed overhead as United 2431's blip began a decisive turn, its new heading taking it directly toward the primary target. The night was about to become very long indeed. Marcus watched in horror as United 2431's radar signature merged with the target aircraft's position. His hands gripped the edge of his console, knuckles white with tension as years of training warred with the very human impulse to look away. But instead of the catastrophic collision he'd feared, Wilson executed a perfect intercepting pattern, using the massive airliner's wake turbulence to destabilize the smaller aircraft. The control room fell silent, except for the steady hum of equipment and the distant rumble of thunder. Sarah's breath caught audibly as she tracked the precision maneuver, her experienced eye recognizing the incredible skill required to position a commercial airliner with such deadly accuracy. Hartford Control. Target aircraft is experiencing severe turbulence, Wilson reported, his voice steady despite the tremendous risks he was taking. Their payload doors are malfunctioning due to structural stress. I can see... Wait. Static crackled through the transmission and Marcus leaned forward, straining to hear. Marcus, I've got visual confirmation. The containers, they match the specs from the bunker. Exact match. Thompson moved closer to Marcus's station, his phone, temporarily forgotten. What exactly did you find in that bunker, Cole? What are we really dealing with here? Before Marcus could respond, Sarah's urgent voice cut through the tension. Multiple targets converging, the scattered aircraft are reversing course, all heading toward the primary target's position. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, tracking the new threat. Formation suggests coordinated response protocol. They're moving with purpose. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling onto his shoulders, memories of similar moments in combat flooding back. They're not just responding to the threat, he said grimly, studying the radar patterns. This is rehearsed. They anticipated the possibility of interference. He keyed his mic. United 2431, be advised you have multiple bogies inbound, F-15s. Or 2 minutes out, but you'll be in contested airspace before they arrive. Copy that, Hartford, Wilson acknowledged, his tone shifting subtly. Marcus recognized the change. It was the same voice he'd used that night in the desert when everything had gone wrong. Be advised I'm picking up unusual electromagnetic signatures from the payload containers. Whatever they're carrying, it's active. Repeat, the payload is active. Thompson's secure line rang, its harsh tone cutting through the tense atmosphere. His face darkened as he listened, jaw tightening with each passing second. Marcus, he said after hanging up, Blackridge just contacted the governor's office. They're claiming Wilson is having a PTSD episode, demanding we order him to land immediately. They're threatening legal action if we don't comply. Classic discreditation strategy, Marcus muttered. Memories of post-mission debriefings surfacing. Same playbook they used after Sandstorm. Paint the witness as unstable. Bury the truth under procedure and paperwork. He grabbed his mic again. James, they're trying to ground you. Whatever evidence you've got up there, we need it documented, now. Already ahead of you, Wilson replied, and Marcus could hear the grim smile in his voice. Full flight recorder data, encrypted backup transmitted to my personal server. But, Marcus, the transmission crackled with interference. There's something else, something bigger than just weapons. The mission in 91, we weren't supposed to find weapons. We were supposed to find proof of what they were planning. For today... Sarah's station lit up with new alerts. The incoming aircraft are taking up attack positions. They're trying to box in United 2431. Thunder boomed directly overhead as Marcus made a decision. Northeast Command, this is Hartford Center. Be advised, situation is escalating. Request weapons-free authorization for incoming F-15s. Negative, Hartford, came the response. Cannot authorize weapons release with civilian aircraft in the engagement zone. Wilson's voice cut through again. Marcus, remember the briefing before Sandstorm? The part about atmospheric conditions. Look at the storm pattern, really look at it. Marcus pulled up the weather radar, overlaying it with the aircraft positions. The storm system didn't make sense. Its formation and movement patterns defied normal meteorological behavior. As he studied the data, a chilling possibility began to form. My God, he whispered. The weapons, the timing, the storm itself. James, are you saying it was never about finding weapons? Wilson confirmed. It was about stopping them from being used. We arrived 30 years too early, and 20 of our brothers paid the price. I won't let that happen again. The radar screen showed the Blackridge aircraft tightening their formation around United 2431, like wolves circling wounded prey. But Marcus knew his friend wasn't prey. He was a hunter who'd waited 3 decades to finish his mission. The storm raged around them as the next phase of a 30-year-old operation began to unfold, with hundreds of lives hanging in the balance. The storm's intensity peaked as Wilson's words sank in, lightning transforming the control room into a strobe-lit stage where past and present collided. Thunder rattled the windows with increasing frequency, each boom feeling less natural than the last. Sarah's computer chimed with an urgent alert, its warning tone barely audible above the storm's fury. Multiple emergency signals, she reported, her voice tight with professional concern. The target aircraft's payload systems are failing. Environmental sensors are showing this can't be right. She double-checked her readings, face pale in the dim light. The atmospheric pressure around the payload is fluctuating wildly. Whatever containment protocols they had, they're breaking down. Marcus felt his military training kick in, years of experience crystallizing into sharp focus. The pieces were there, had been there all along, but he'd been looking at them wrong. Just like that night in the desert. James, he keyed his mic, talk to me. What are we really dealing with here? What did we actually find in that bunker? Static crackled across the radio before Wilson's voice emerged, tight with tension, but clear with purpose. Operation Sandstorm wasn't about chemical weapons, Marcus. That was just the cover story. It was about weather modification, weaponized, atmospheric manipulation. Another crack of thunder punctuated his words. The storm tonight isn't natural. They're using it as cover because they created it. Thompson's face went pale as the implications hit him. The facility breach last week was them testing the system. Marcus finished, memories realigning themselves into a terrifying new pattern. All those late-night flights during storms. They weren't practicing for transport. They were causing the storms. He turned to Sarah, mind racing ahead. Pull up regional weather data for the past month. Look for any unusual patterns, anything that defies normal meteorological behavior. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, multiple weather maps appearing on her screen, already on it. Pulling satellite data, pressure systems, temperature gradients. Wait. She leaned closer to her monitor. The storm formations, they're not random. Each major system over the past month originated within a 10-mile radius. Of that facility, the pattern is too perfect to be natural. As Sarah worked, United 2431's transponder squawked another coded message. Wilson's voice cut through the static with renewed urgency. Marcus, their containment is failing. The payload. It's not just about creating storms. It's about controlling them, weaponizing them. If that disperses at this altitude, it'll interact with the storm system they've already created, Marcus realized, cold dread settling in his stomach, amplifying whatever they planned to demonstrate. He keyed his emergency frequency. Northeast Command, this is Hartford Control. Upgrade situation to Broken Arrow Prime. Request immediate evacuation authorization for all communities in projected storm path. Thompson grabbed his secure line again, but Wilson's transmission interrupted before he could dial. "You don't understand. Evacuation won't help. The bunker, Marcus. Remember the formulas, the calculations? They weren't theoretical. They were watching the atmosphere itself, learning how to turn it into a weapon. 30 years of refinement, of testing, of perfecting what we found that night." Lightning flashed again, and Marcus noticed something odd. The bolts seemed to be forming patterns, concentrating around the area where the Black Ridge aircraft circled. Sarah noticed it too, her weather radar showing impossible data. "The electrical activity," she said softly. "It's not random. They're somehow directing it, using the payload to influence the storm's behavior." "Of course," Marcus whispered, another memory surfacing. "The mission briefing. They told us we were looking for chemical weapons, but the intel focused on atmospheric conditions. Wind patterns, pressure systems. We thought it was just for planning the insertion, but it was the actual objective," Wilson confirmed. "The weapons were never the target. The weather itself was the weapon." His voice turned grim. "And now they're ready to demonstrate what 30 years of development can do. Marcus, if that payload fully disperses into this storm system..." Thunder crashed overhead, but this time it seemed to linger, rolling on longer than natural physics should. "Allow." Sarah's monitors were lighting up with warnings, atmospheric sensors reporting impossible readings. The Black Ridge aircraft maintained their circular formation, but now Marcus could see they weren't just containing United 2431. They were creating a perimeter around something that was growing in the sky above. "My God," Thompson breathed, staring at the radar screen. "They're not just controlling the storm, they're transforming it." Marcus keyed his mic again, forcing his voice to remain steady. "James, whatever you're seeing up there, we need details, now." "It's beautiful in a terrible way," Wilson replied softly. "The air itself is changing, becoming something else, something controlled. Marcus, we can't let them demonstrate this, not here, not anywhere." A pause, then, "I think I know how to stop it, but what?" "But this time, old friend, only one of us is coming back." The storm raged on, but now its fury felt calculated, directed, a weapon 30 years in the making, finally ready to be unleashed. Unless a pilot who'd carried the truth for 3 decades could find a way to stop it, no matter the cost. The F-15s finally arrived, their powerful engines sending thunder of their own to compete with the manufactured storm. The fighters emerged from the clouds like avenging angels, their sleek forms briefly illuminated by lightning that seemed to reach for them with unnatural precision. But Marcus knew the situation had evolved far beyond a simple intercept mission. "United 2431, this is Raptor Lead." A new voice crackled over the radio, sharp and professional. "We have visual contact with target aircraft, standing by for instructions. Be advised, our radar systems are experiencing unusual interference patterns." Before Marcus could respond, Wilson's urgent transmission cut through. "Negative, Raptor Lead. Direct engagement could trigger payload dispersal. The containment systems are already critical." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen this before, who knew exactly what failure would look like. The atmospheric catalyst is highly unstable. Any sudden changes in air pressure from weapons release could accelerate the reaction. Sarah's analysis appeared on her screen, confirming their worst fears. The data scrolled past in an endless stream of damning evidence, each line telling part of a story 30 years in the making. "Marcus, look at this. Every major storm in the region for the past month originated within a 10-mile radius of that facility. The pattern is undeniable." She brought up a series of satellite images, time-stamped and annotated. They've been practicing, fine-tuning their control. Each storm was slightly different, testing various atmospheric conditions. But why demonstrate? It now Thompson wondered aloud, his usual commanding presence shaken by the scope of what they were witnessing. Why risk exposure after keeping it secret for 30 years? He gestured at the radar screen, where the Blackridge aircraft maintained their precise formation around the growing atmospheric anomaly. They had to know this would attract attention, because they finally perfected it, Marcus said softly, memories of that night in the desert suddenly sharp and clear. The pieces had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, like the weapon they'd been developing. What we found in that bunker, it wasn't just plans for weather control, it was a blueprint for climate warfare. They needed 3 decades to get it right. United 2431's altimeter reading suddenly began to fluctuate wildly, the numbers jumping in ways that defied normal aircraft behavior. Wilson's voice came through, strained but determined. "Hartford, the storm cell is transforming. Whatever they released, it's starting to interact with the atmosphere. I've never seen anything like this." A pause, filled with static and the growing roar of unnatural wind. The air itself is becoming charged, like the whole sky is conducting electricity. The other aircraft, they're taking readings, gathering data. This isn't just a demonstration, it's a field test. Raptor Lead's voice cut in again. "Hartford Control, our instruments are going haywire. Whatever that storm is doing, it's affecting our flight systems. Request immediate instructions." Marcus studied his radar screen, watching as the F-15s circled the perimeter of the affected area. They were some of the most advanced fighters in the world, and yet they were helpless against an enemy they couldn't shoot down. "Raptor Lead, maintain safe distance. Do not attempt to penetrate the storm cell. Focus on containing the Blackridge aircraft if they try to escape." "The storm's electrical activity is intensifying," Sarah reported, her voice tight with concern. "Lightning strikes are increasing exponentially, but they're not random. They're following a pattern, almost like they're being directed." She brought up another screen of data. "Temperature differentials are creating impossible pressure gradients. If this continues to expand—" "How long?" Marcus asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "At current rates of growth?" Sarah checked her calculations. "Maybe 20 minutes before the reaction becomes self-sustaining. After that," she left the implications unspoken. Wilson's voice crackled through again. "Marcus, I'm looking at their dispersal pattern. The catalyst isn't just affecting the current storm. It's designed to spread, to seed other weather systems. They're not trying to control one storm." His tone carried the weight of terrible understanding. "They're trying to control all of them. Permanent atmospheric manipulation." Lightning flashed again, but this time it stayed, forming a web of constant energy around the aircraft. The radar screen showed impossible readings as the very air began to change, transformed by technology that had taken 30 years to perfect. Thompson was on multiple phones now, trying to coordinate an evacuation that Marcus knew would be futile. How do you evacuate people from the sky itself? "James," Marcus keyed his mic, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Whatever you're thinking up there has to be done," Wilson finished. "I've got a plan, old friend. But first, I need you to understand what really happened that night in the desert. Why 20 good men had to die." Static crackled through the transmission. "Because what they're creating here, it's not just a weapon, it's a key, and once they turn it, there's no going back." The storm raged on, its fury now focused and deliberate, while in the Hartford control room, Marcus Cole prepared to hear the truth that had cost so many lives to protect. Above them all, United 2431 held its position. A commercial airliner turned, witness to either humanity's greatest triumph or its most terrible mistake. The radar screen showed the impossible, a circular pattern of turbulence forming around the target aircraft, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The other, scattered Blackridge aircraft maintained their precise distance from the phenomenon's edge, their positions suggesting not panic, but purpose. Marcus had seen enough military operations to recognize the difference between reaction and rehearsal. They're not running, Marcus realized, years of tactical training clicking into place. They're taking measurements. This is their real test. He turned to Sarah, whose fingers were flying across her keyboard. What are the atmospheric readings telling us? Sarah shook her head in disbelief as she analyzed the incoming data. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The storm cell isn't just growing, it's organizing itself. Temperature gradients, pressure differentials, electrical activity, they're all following patterns that defy natural meteorology. She brought up a 3D rendering of the affected airspace. Look at this structure. It's almost architectural. Thompson was on multiple phones now, coordinating with emergency services across 3 states. His commanding voice carried hints of strain as he processed the stream of increasingly alarming reports. National Weather Service is reporting unprecedented barometric pressure changes. This storm system isn't behaving according to any known patterns. We've got meteorologists from 3 different universities trying to model its behavior, but their computers keep crashing. The mathematics don't make sense. Because they're not supposed to. Wilson's voice crackled through, grim with understanding. Marcus, I'm looking at their payload container through my weather radar. The dispersal wasn't an accident, it's a controlled release. They're creating some kind of atmospheric catalyst, something that fundamentally changes how air masses interact. Static interrupted his transmission momentarily. Remember the formulas we found in the bunker? The ones that looked like chemical equations but didn't match any known compounds? Marcus felt his throat tighten as another piece of the 30-year-old puzzle clicked into place. They weren't chemical formulas at all, were they? They were atmospheric equations, weather patterns. Exactly. But not just any patterns, they were designing new ones, patterns that don't exist in nature. And now, Wilson's voice trailed off as his instruments registered something new. Oh God, Marcus, the catalyst isn't just affecting the storm. It's changing the basic properties of the air itself. The electrical conductivity, the thermal behavior, everything. Raptor Lead's voice cut through the growing tension. Hartford Control. Be advised our systems are showing critical failures in all weather monitoring equipment. Whatever that storm is doing, it's interfering with our ability to track it. Request immediate guidance. Marcus studied his radar display, where the impossible storm continued to grow and evolve. The F-15s were holding their position at the periphery, their advanced technology rendered nearly useless by something that shouldn't exist. The Black Ridge aircraft had settled into what looked like a data-gathering formation, their precise spacing suggesting they were mapping the phenomenon's development. James, Marcus keyed his mic, fighting to keep his voice steady, those passengers are. Why, I can't let this happen, Wilson finished. I made a choice 30 years ago to stay quiet, to let them bury the truth along with our brothers. United 2431's transponder began broadcasting a new sequence, coordinates for an emergency landing strip. Not this time, not when I know what they're really trying to do. Sarah's station lit up with new alerts, multiple electromagnetic anomalies forming within the storm cell. The energy readings, they're exponential. Whatever chain reaction they started, it's accelerating. Thompson moved to Marcus's station, his phones temporarily forgotten. How long until it reaches populated areas? That's not the real question. Wilson's transmission cut through, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. Ask yourself, why test it here? Why now? Think about the location, the timing, the weather patterns this time of year. Marcus felt his blood run cold as the implications hit him. The jet stream, he whispered. They're not just creating a localized effect. They're trying to reach the entire eastern seaboard, Wilson confirmed. This storm system connects directly to the jet stream. Once their catalyst reaches those upper-level winds, he left the consequence unspoken. but everyone in the control room could fill in the blank. Weather patterns across the entire continent would be affected, perhaps permanently altered. "James, what are you thinking?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen that tone in his friend's voice before, on another night when impossible choices had to be made. The catalyst needs specific atmospheric conditions to propagate, conditions like this storm. Wilson's voice had taken on the calm certainty Marcus remembered from their military days, the tone of someone who'd accepted the cost of what needed to be done. "Change the conditions, and you disrupt the reaction," Marcus finished. "But at this altitude, that means taking it up," Wilson confirmed. "Above the storm, into thinner air. It'll neutralize the catalyst, but—" He didn't need to finish the thought. At that altitude, with a commercial airliner, the consequences were obvious. Sarah's voice cut through the moment of grim understanding. United 2431's engines weren't designed for that kind of altitude. The atmospheric pressure alone would tear the aircraft apart. "Not if I time it right," Wilson replied. "The catalyst is changing air density in predictable patterns. If I can ride one of those density waves up, use their own weapon against them." Static crackled through his transmission. "Marcus, I need you to understand, this is bigger than just weather control. What we found in that bunker, what they killed our brothers to protect, it wasn't just about making storms, it was about controlling entire climate systems." Lightning flashed continuously now, forming impossible geometric patterns in the sky. The Blackridge aircraft had tightened their formation, their instruments recording every second of what they surely thought was their moment of triumph. But they hadn't counted on the determination of a pilot who'd carried the weight of truth for 3 decades. "Thompson," Marcus turned to his supervisor, "I need you to clear everything out of the upper atmosphere, right now. Whatever Wilson's about to do, already on it." Thompson nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. "But Marcus, those passengers will die anyway if that catalyst reaches the jet stream." Wilson's voice cut through, resolute. "I've already transmitted all the flight data, all the evidence, everything we found in the bunker, everything they tried to bury. It's being uploaded to secure servers across the country right now." A pause, filled with static and the growing roar of unnatural wind. "Marcus, tell their families, tell them why—" The radar screen showed United 2431's transponder beginning to climb, its path taking it directly into the heart of the transformed storm. The F-15s moved to follow, but their instruments were too compromised by the atmospheric changes to maintain close formation. This was a mission Wilson would have to complete alone, just like the truth he'd carried for 30 years. Marcus keyed his mic one final time, throat tight with emotions he couldn't fully process. "James, Godspeed." The storm raged on, its unnatural fury about to meet the equally powerful force of human determination to make things right, no matter the cost. In the Hartford control room, Marcus Cole watched his radar screen and prepared to witness either the salvation or the destruction of everything he held dear. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of hundreds of passengers, but potentially the future of weather itself. The storm below had begun to fracture, its unnatural patterns dissolving as United 2431 held its position in the thin upper atmosphere. The Blackridge aircraft had scattered completely, their mission compromised, their decades-long experiment unraveling in the face of one man's determination to expose the truth. In the control room, Marcus watched his radar screen with an intensity that made his eyes burn, knowing these moments would burn themselves into his memory just as deeply as that night in the desert 30 years ago. "Marcus!" Sarah called out, softly, her voice carrying a mix of awe and concern. "Look at the passenger manifest again. The route changes, the timing. Wilson didn't just happen to be here. He orchestrated this entire scenario." She pulled up a series of documents on her screen, Flight plans were altered, weather reports modified. He didn't just take this flight, he made sure it would be exactly where it needed to be. Because he knew, Marcus nodded, understanding dawning like a cold light. Somehow, he found out. What they were planning took the flight deliberately to be in position. He smiled sadly, remembering countless mission briefings where Wilson had seen patterns others missed. Always was a better tactician than me. Even back then, he could, read between the lines, see the bigger picture. United 2431's transponder was broadcasting erratically now, its signals distorted by the extreme altitude and the lingering effects of the atmospheric catalyst. But Wilson's voice came through one last time, clear despite the static. Hartford Control, United 2431, primary mission accomplished. Catalyst dispersal has been neutralized. A pause, filled with the sound of straining engines. But there's more, Marcus. The black box data. It's not just about tonight. I've included everything. About Sandstorm, about what we really found, about why they needed those 20 men to disappear. Thompson, who had been coordinating with emergency services, moved closer to Marcus's station. What exactly did you find that night? What was worth killing for? The future, Wilson's voice crackled through. Or their version of it. The bunker wasn't just a weapons facility, it was a proof of concept, the first successful test of atmospheric manipulation on a small scale. Static nearly overwhelmed. His next words, they needed more time to perfect it, to scale it up. Our team wasn't supposed to find it then. We were supposed to find something else, something that would justify more funding, more secrecy. Instead, we found the truth. Sarah's monitors flashed with new warnings. United 2431's structural integrity is failing. The hull wasn't designed for these conditions. They need to descend now. Not yet, Wilson replied, his voice strained but determined. Have to be sure the catalyst is completely neutralized. No chance of reconstitution. Another burst of static. Marcus, remember what Phillips said that night, just before... Some secrets are written in the sky, Marcus quoted softly, the words coming back with painful clarity. We thought he was delirious from the heat, the chaos, but he saw it, didn't he? He understood what they were really doing. And he died for it. They all did. Because they glimpsed something they weren't supposed to see for another 30 years. Wilson's transmission was breaking up more frequently now. The black box data is encoded with Phillips's old cipher, the one we used for unofficial mission. Reports, everything's there, the original formulas, the development timeline, the real purpose behind Black Ridge's weather monitoring stations. Thompson's secure line rang, its harsh tone cutting through the tense atmosphere. His face darkened as he listened. Black Ridge is claiming proprietary interference. They're demanding we ground United 2431 immediately, citing national security. Concerns? Of course they are. Wilson's voice carried a hint of grim satisfaction. Because they know it's over. The catalyst's breaking down, their decades of work unraveling. And this time, there won't be any cover-up. No convenient accidents. No classified reports. Marcus studied his radar screen, where United 2431's transponder signal flickered like a candle in a wind that shouldn't exist. James, the aircraft can't take much more of this. You've done it. You've stopped them. It's time to bring her. Down. Almost, Wilson replied. Just need another minute to ensure complete neutralization. Besides, his voice softened. You know what happens next, old friend. What has to happen? Some truths demand a witness, and some debts can only be paid one way. Sarah's computer chimed with urgent alerts. Multiple system failures imminent, hull temperature approaching critical levels. The air pressure differential is literally tearing. The aircraft apart. James, Marcus keyed his mic, fighting to keep his voice steady. Those passengers will survive. The descent profile is already programmed. Aircraft can glide down safely from this altitude, even with minimal power. Wilson's calm certainty came through, despite the static. But someone has to stay at the controls. Someone has to make sure. A pause, then. It's fitting, really. 30 years ago, we lost 20 good men because we weren't ready for the truth. Today, we save hundreds because we finally are. The storm below had almost completely dissipated now, its unnatural patterns dissolved by the very science that created them. The Blackridge aircraft were long gone, their mission in ruins, their secrets about to be exposed to the world. In the control room, Marcus Cole watched as his friend completed the mission they'd started 3 decades ago in a desert halfway around the world. Hartford Control, United 2431. Wilson's voice came through one last time. Initiating emergency descent. Protocol. Aircraft will maintain automated glide path to designated emergency strip. Static nearly overwhelmed his next words. Marcus, tell their families, tell them what really happened, what it was all for. Some secrets are written in the sky, but the truth is written in what we do with them. The radar screen tracked United 2431's controlled descent through the last remnants of the transformed storm. Emergency crews were already converging on the designated landing site, prepared for whatever might come next. But Marcus knew the real emergency had already been averted, at a cost that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Godspeed, old friend," he whispered, watching the transponder signal begin its final journey. Mission accomplished. The story of United 2431 would be told in congressional hearings and newspaper headlines in the months to come. Blackridge's experiments would be exposed, their decades of secret research laid bare by the very technology they'd tried to control. But for Marcus Cole, it would always be about that night in the storm when an old friend finished what they'd started 3 decades before in a desert halfway around the world. Sometimes he realized the greatest acts of heroism come not from dying for what you believe in, but from living long enough to make things right. And sometimes the truth demands more than just witnesses. It demands champions willing to write it across the sky itself, no matter the cost. 3 months after the incident, Marcus Cole stood at Arlington National Cemetery, his weathered hand resting on a newly installed memorial. 21 names were etched into the black granite, the original 20 from Operation Sandstorm, and now James Wilson. The autumn wind rustled through nearby trees, entirely natural this time, carrying with it the first hints of winter. Sarah Chen stood a respectful distance behind him, holding a thick folder of documents that had consumed their lives for the past 12 weeks. The congressional hearings had finally concluded, Blackridge's secrets exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. The truth, as it turned out, had been even more staggering than they'd imagined. "The final report goes public tomorrow," Sarah said softly, moving to stand beside him. "They're calling it the most significant climate manipulation conspiracy in history. Blackridge's entire network has been exposed. Weather stations across 3 continents, all collecting data, all working toward the same goal." Marcus nodded, his fingers tracing Wilson's name on the cold stone. Control. That's what it was always about. Not just weather, but the power to shape it, to weaponize the sky itself. He turned to face Sarah, his eyes carrying the weight of vindication mixed with loss. "The formulas from the black box data, they've been authenticated by every major atmospheric research institution in the country. What they were attempting—" Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "The science was brilliant, in a terrifying way. They weren't just trying to control individual storms. They were developing a method to permanently alter global weather patterns. The implications for military operations, agriculture, entire economies would have changed everything," Marcus finished, "just like Philip suspected that night in the bunker." He pulled an old, creased photograph from his pocket, 22 young men in flight suits standing beside their aircraft in the desert sun. He was the first to realize what the formulas really meant, tried to warn us, but by then it was too late. The wind picked up, carrying distant thunder, a regular storm system, monitored by regular meteorologists. The world was slowly returning to normal, though normal had taken on a new meaning since that night 3 months ago. Weather stations around the globe were being audited, their data scrutinized for signs of manipulation. The science that Black Ridge had developed was being studied openly now, its potential for both benefit and catastrophe debated in universities rather than bunkers. "The passengers?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd read every report, attended every debriefing, but some details he needed to hear again and again. "All survived," Sarah confirmed. "The automated descent system worked perfectly, just like Wilson planned." She hesitated, then added, "Some of them have been asking to speak with you. They want to understand what happened up there. Why their pilot chose to finish a mission 30 years in the making," Marcus said quietly, "to ensure that 20 deaths weren't in vain." He turned away from the memorial, his decision made. "Set up the meetings. They deserve to know the whole story." They walked slowly through the cemetery, past rows of identical white headstones that marked other sacrifices, other secrets. Sarah consulted her notes as they moved. The FBI task force finished their analysis of Black Ridge's facilities. The weather station network was more extensive than anyone imagined. They had monitoring posts disguised as agricultural research centers, climate study outposts, all collecting data, Marcus nodded, all feeding into their models, helping them perfect the formulas we found in that bunker. He paused, looking up at the sky. "You know what the hardest part is? Knowing that somewhere out there, someone else is probably trying to do the same thing. The science exists now. It can't be unlearned. But it can be watched," Sarah countered. "The oversight committees, the new international protocols for weather monitoring. Wilson's sacrifice didn't just expose one conspiracy, it created a framework to prevent the next one." They reached Marcus's car, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. The weight of the past 3 months, the investigations, the testimonies, the gradual unfolding of a truth 30 years in the making, seemed to demand one final moment of reflection. "Thompson's taking early retirement," Sarah mentioned, changing the subject. "Says the job isn't what it used to be. He recommended you for his position, you know." Marcus managed a small smile. "Supervising air traffic control for Hartford International. Never thought I'd end up back where it all started." He looked at the folder in Sarah's hands. "The classified files from Sandstorm. They're all being declassified. Every last page," she confirmed. "President's orders. Full transparency. The families will finally know exactly what happened to their loved ones." She paused, then added softly, "Wilson made sure of that." Thunder rumbled again, closer now, and Marcus felt the first drops of rain, natural rain, born of normal atmospheric conditions and regular weather patterns. The world would never look at storms the same way again, but maybe that was the point. "Some truths change everything they touch, you know," Sarah said, as they finally turned to leave. "There's a certain poetry to it. Wilson used their own science against them, turned their weapon into its own undoing." "That's who he was," Marcus replied, memories of countless missions flooding back, always looking for the pattern within the pattern, the solution hidden in the problem itself. He reached the car but paused before getting in. "The new oversight committee, they've asked me to consult, help develop protocols to prevent something like this from happening again." "Are you going to do it?" Marcus looked up at the sky one last time, where natural clouds were gathering for a natural storm. "Someone has to be the witness," he said finally. "Someone has to remember what happens when we try to play God with forces we barely understand." He opened his car door. "Besides, I made a promise. To all of them. The rain began to fall in earnest, now washing over the memorial, where 21 names told a story of sacrifice, secrecy, and ultimately truth. Somewhere above, in the clouds that no one would ever look at quite the same way again, the legacy of United 2431 lived on, not in the science it had exposed, but in the warning it had written across the sky itself. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as he drove away, the most important victories aren't the ones that change the world, but the ones that keep it from being changed in ways it was never meant to be. And sometimes the truest heroism lies not in the secrets we keep, but in knowing exactly when to let them go. 1 year to the day after United 2431's final flight, Marcus Cole sat in his new office at Hartford International Airport, watching another storm roll in across the Connecticut landscape. This one was completely natural. He'd checked the atmospheric readings himself, a habit he'd developed since that fateful night. The wall behind his desk was covered with framed newspaper headlines chronicling the aftermath of what the media had dubbed the Black Ridge incident, but his eyes were fixed on a single photograph, James Wilson's official Air Force portrait taken just days before Operation Sandstorm. A knock at his door interrupted his reverie. Sarah Chen entered, now, wearing the supervisor's stripes she'd earned during the past year's upheaval. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, setting a thick folder on his desk. "The final implementation reports from the International Weather Monitoring Commission. They're rolling out the new detection protocols next month." Marcus nodded, picking up the folder. The protocols were largely based on the evidence Wilson had transmitted during those final minutes. Patterns to watch for, atmospheric signatures that might indicate manipulation, any pushback from the private sector. Some, Sarah admitted, taking a seat. A few research facilities are claiming it'll interfere with legitimate climate studies. But after Black Ridge, she shrugged. Nobody wants to be the next conspiracy. Unveiled. The oversight requirements are being accepted as the new normal. Thunder rolled outside, and Marcus found himself automatically analyzing its sound pattern, checking for any irregularities. The habit was hard to break, even now. Sometimes, "I wonder what Phillips would think of all this," he mused, glancing at the photo on his wall. He was the first to notice something was wrong in that bunker, the first to realize what those formulas really meant. "And now his theories are being taught in universities," Sarah noted. "The Phillips equation for atmospheric manipulation, it's become fundamental to understanding how weather patterns can be influenced. They're using his work to help prevent the very thing that got him killed." Marcus smiled sadly. Irony was always his favorite form of humor. He turned to his computer, pulling up the latest satellite imagery. "You know, the Chinese government finally admitted last week that they had a similar program, not as advanced as Black Ridge's, but heading in the same direction." "I saw the reports," Sarah nodded. "That makes, 5 countries now that have come clean about weather modification research. All of them claiming it was for agricultural purposes, of course." "Of course," Marcus echoed. "Just like Black Ridge claimed they were developing better tornado prediction models." He stood moving to the window to watch the approaching storm. "The technology's out there now. Can't be undone. All we can do is watch for the signs, try to prevent it from being weaponized again." Sarah joined him at the window, her reflection overlapping with the darkening sky beyond. "Have you visited the families since the memorial dedication?" "Some," Marcus replied quietly. "Rodriguez's daughter is working for NOAA now, helping develop some of the new monitoring systems. Martinez's son joined the Air Force, says he wants to make sure other soldiers don't die for secrets they don't understand." He paused, watching lightning fork across the sky. Wilson's wife donated his research papers to MIT, everything he'd collected over 30 years, trying to piece together what really happened in that bunker. "And now everyone knows," Sarah said softly. The congressional reports, the international investigations, the academic studies. It's all public record now. No more shadows, no more secrets. Marcus turned from the window, picking up an old mission folder from his desk. Declassified now, its pages yellowed with age. You know what Wilson told me once, back during training? He said the sky was the perfect place to hide things, because everyone's looking at it, but nobody really sees it. Not until it's too late. He proved that wrong, Sarah pointed out. He saw what they were doing, understood it in time to stop it. At a cost, Marcus reminded her, though they both knew the alternative would have been far worse. The simulations, run after the incident, had shown what would have happened if Blackridge's catalyst had reached the jet stream. Weather patterns disrupted across the entire hemisphere, climate systems permanently altered. A new alert popped up on Marcus's computer. Standard protocol now for any unusual atmospheric readings. But this one was just a normal pressure system, moving exactly as nature intended. Sarah checked it anyway, thoroughness having become second nature to everyone in air traffic control since that night. The Oversight Committee meets next week, she mentioned, changing the subject. They want your input on expanding the monitoring network to cover the Pacific routes. Marcus nodded, already familiar with the proposals. The new systems would track atmospheric conditions across all major air corridors, watching for any signs of manipulation. It wasn't perfect. The technology that Blackridge had developed could still be replicated, still be weaponized. But at least now they knew what to look for, knew the signatures of human interference in natural systems. You know what the hardest part is? He said suddenly, voicing a thought that had been bothering him for months. Knowing that somewhere out there, someone's probably looking at all this exposure, all these revelations, and seeing it as a challenge, a blueprint for how to do it better, hide it deeper. Probably, Sarah agreed, but that's why we're here, why Wilson made sure we'd understand exactly what to watch for. She gestured at the wall of headlines. Every failed attempt at weather, manipulation, every exposed conspiracy, they all leave patterns, and now we know how to read them. The storm outside was intensifying, but Marcus felt none of the tension that had gripped him that night a year ago. This was just weather being weather. The sky doing what it was meant to do without human interference. The radar screen on his desk showed dozens of aircraft navigating the system safely, their pilots and passengers unaware of how close the world had come to a very different reality. Thompson called yesterday, Sarah mentioned. Says retirement. Suits him, but he misses the action. Wanted to know if we'd figured out yet why Blackridge chose that particular night for their demonstration. I have a theory about that, Marcus said, picking up Wilson's photo. They needed specific atmospheric conditions, yes, but they also needed to prove they could control them. What better way than to create a storm on a night that was supposed to be clear? He set the photo down carefully. They just never expected someone to recognize their fingerprints on the sky. The thunder outside rolled again, its rhythm natural, its pattern unplanned. Marcus Cole, now Director of Air Traffic Control for Hartford International, watched the storm approach and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. The sky held no more secrets from him, at least none that he wasn't prepared to face. Sometimes, he said quietly, the best way to honor a sacrifice is to make sure it never needs to be repeated. Sarah nodded, understanding. They both knew that somewhere out there, others might be dreaming up new ways to control the weather, to weaponize the atmosphere itself. But thanks to James Wilson and 20 other brave men, those dreams would find themselves facing a world prepared to recognize them, to stop them before they could take flight. The storm passed overhead, dropping its rain on a world forever changed by one night of truth written in the clouds, and in his office Marcus Cole watched it go, a guardian of secrets no longer needed, a witness to a sky that would never again be taken for granted. 18 months after United 2431's final flight, Marcus Cole found himself standing in a lecture hall at MIT, facing a room full of atmospheric science graduate students. Behind him, complex equations covered the whiteboard, the same formulas he'd first seen in that desert bunker 30 years ago, now part of a standard curriculum in advanced weather system analysis. The Phillips-Wilson equations, he began, gesturing to the board, weren't just about predicting weather patterns. They were about understanding how to influence them at their most fundamental level. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the eager faces before him. But more importantly, they teach us how to recognize when someone else is trying to do the same thing. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Dr. Cole, is it true that Blackridge had successfully modified local weather patterns before the incident? There are rumors about unusual storm formations in the years leading up to their exposure. Marcus nodded, pulling up a series of satellite images on the projection screen. These were taken over a 5-year period before United 2431. Look at the storm formation patterns, particularly in these sectors. He highlighted several areas. Natural weather systems follow certain rules. These didn't, but nobody noticed, another student pointed out. How did they hide something that big for so long? Because they did it gradually, Marcus explained, remembering Wilson's final transmissions. Small changes spread out over time, a storm that lasted slightly longer than it should, a pressure system that moved against prevailing winds. Nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms, but all part of a larger pattern. The discussion continued, but Marcus found his mind drifting to a conversation he'd had with Sarah earlier that week. The International Weather Monitoring Commission had detected unusual atmospheric readings over the South China Sea, subtle anomalies that matched some of Blackridge's early experiments. The Chinese government had denied any involvement, but the patterns were unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. After the lecture, a young man approached him, clutching a worn copy of the congressional report on the Blackridge incident. "Sir, my father was on United 2431 that night," he said quietly. "He never talks about it, but I know it changed him, changed how he sees the sky." Marcus studied the young man's face, recognizing the same need for understanding he'd seen in so many others affected by that night. "The sky was never just empty space," he replied. "It was always full of patterns, of possibilities. What Blackridge did was prove those patterns could be controlled. What your father witnessed was the cost of that control." Later that evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room, reviewing the latest monitoring reports from the Global Detection Network. Sarah had insisted on forwarding them daily, even when he was away from Hartford. The system they'd helped design was working. Already it had identified 3 attempts at unauthorized weather modification, each one shut down before it could fully develop. His phone buzzed with a text from Thompson. "Weather Service picked up something strange over the Pacific. Might want to take a look." Attached was a satellite image showing an unusual circular cloud formation, too perfect to be natural. Marcus pulled up the relevant atmospheric data on his laptop, analyzing the patterns with the expertise born of both training and hard experience. The formation was similar to what they'd seen that night, but different enough to suggest someone had learned from Blackridge's mistakes. They were trying to hide their signatures better, to blend their manipulations more seamlessly with natural weather patterns, but they hadn't counted on the new detection protocols or on the growing network of people trained to recognize the subtle signs of atmospheric tampering. Within hours, investigation teams would be dispatched, monitoring stations would be alerted, and another attempt at playing God with the weather would be thwarted. His phone rang again. Sarah, this time. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, without preamble. "Rodriguez's daughter just got appointed to head the new Atmospheric Defense Division at NOA. She's implementing some of the protective measures Wilson designed. He'd like that, Marcus smiled, remembering his old friend's dedication to protecting the sky itself, using what we learned to prevent history from repeating. There's more, Sarah continued. Remember those encrypted files from Wilson's personal server, the ones nobody could crack? MIT's quantum computing lab finally broke through. It's... Marcus, you need to see this. Marcus sat up straighter, his attention fully focused. What did they find? Evidence that Blackridge wasn't acting alone. There was an entire network of private research facilities, all working on different aspects of atmospheric manipulation. Some of them are still operating, just under different names. The implications sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Send me everything, and Sarah, alert the commission. If there are more players out there, already done, she assured him. But there's something else. Wilson didn't just leave us the means to detect weather. Manipulation. He left us a blueprint for protecting against it. The very technology Blackridge developed to control weather systems. He figured out how to use it defensively, to stabilize patterns that are being artificially disrupted. Marcus walked to his hotel window, looking out at the Boston skyline, where natural clouds were gathering for an evening shower. He turned their weapon into a shield, he mused. Even at the end, he was thinking ahead, planning for the next threat. The rain began to fall, and Marcus found himself automatically analyzing its pattern, checking for any signs of manipulation. It was a habit he'd probably never break, but now it felt less like paranoia and more like vigilance. The sky had always been a battlefield, for light and darkness, for heat and cold, for the countless forces that shaped Earth's weather. Now it was also a battlefield for truth, for the right of nature to follow its own course without human interference. His laptop chimed with a new alert from the monitoring network. Another unusual formation, this time over the Indian Ocean. But thanks to Wilson's sacrifice, thanks to the technology he'd helped expose and the understanding he'd died to protect, they knew what to look for now. The sky held no more secrets from those who had learned to read its true patterns. Tomorrow, Marcus would return to Hartford, to his role as guardian of both air traffic and atmospheric integrity. There would be more attempts at weather manipulation, more groups trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. But they would face a world prepared to stop them, armed with the knowledge bought at such a high price on that stormy night 18 months ago. The rain continued to fall, each drop a reminder of what had been saved, what had been lost, and what still needed to be protected. In his hotel room, high above Boston, Marcus Cole watched the natural weather unfold and silently renewed the promise he'd made at Arlington National Cemetery, to ensure that the sacrifice of 21 brave men would continue to protect the skies they died to keep free. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest victories are not in the battles we win, but in the wars we prevent. And sometimes, the truest legacy is not in what we achieve, but in what we enable others to protect. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale of United 2431 and the revelations that unfolded in the stormy skies above Hartford International Airport, please consider subscribing to follow more gripping stories that blend science, suspense, and human courage in unexpected ways. By subscribing, you'll be the first to discover new narratives that explore hidden truths behind seemingly ordinary events, the intersection of advanced technology and human determination, stories of sacrifice, redemption, and the cost of doing what's right. Complex mysteries that span decades. Characters who must confront impossible choices. Don't miss out on future installments that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe now to ensure you don't miss the next chapter in this unfolding series of suspense and discovery. Would you like to read the sequel or other related stories? Subscribe today to join us on the next adventure.